The city is colder than usual, and the fog settles low over the cobbled streets like a damp shroud. You wake to a letter hand-delivered by a boy with coal on his cheeks and a nervous shuffle in his step. The boy couldn't catch his breath while handing the letter to you. The envelope is unmarked, sealed in plain wax, but the handwriting is unmistakably that of Dr. William Rook, a trusted acquaintance and private physician in Hampstead. It's the Rupert's mansion, the boy said. Whole household dead, 3 gone, no wounds. You buttoned your coat before he finished. The Ruperts were a quiet family, not rich, but comfortable. The husband was a merchant. The wife was once a music tutor. Their house was ivy-covered. 3 stories, narrow garden, was neat, middle class, and ordinary. But inside the mansion, the air was bitter. The bodies were found at the breakfast table. Mr. Rupert slumped over a half-eaten egg. Miss Rupert's mouth was face-pale and twisted, and she had fallen sideways onto the carpet, fingers still clutching. Her spoon, each had taken only a few bites of porridge. All had drunk their morning tea. No bruises, no signs of struggle, just silence. Doctors saying poison. The constable told you. Tea's the likely source. Baby's wet nurse made the bottle separate, so she's unharmed. You carefully inspected the teacups before you. 3 beautifully matching cups that sparkled. In the light, there were no unusual colors to raise an eyebrow, nor any strange scents. In the kitchen, the teapot still steamed faintly. Someone had tried to clean it. There were water spots around the kitchen slab, fresh streaks on the counter, as if the pot had been rinsed and replaced. Who served breakfast, you asked? A maid, they said. A young girl, new to the household, hired just 2 weeks prior. Her name, according to the neighbors, was Nora. But Nora was gone. The back door had been left slightly open. A faint set of footprints led across the wet lawn to the back gate and vanished. You studied the name again. No address on file. No reference letter. The agency she was supposedly hired through had no such name listed in their recent placements. She must have forged the documents, the constable muttered. Who'd go through all that trouble just to kill strangers? You didn't answer, but something about the scene was too neat, too calm. In the nursery upstairs, the baby cried softly while the wet nurse rocked him. You spotted a faint smudge on the bottle, just a trace of something pale around the rim. You took it for testing, just to be sure. On the way out, you examined the ashes in your kitchen, burnt paper, a charred cloth scrap, and something glinting a small, half-melted pin, the kind worn on a maid's apron. She had tried to destroy every trace of herself, but she had missed the most important one. At the bottom of the waste bin sat a square paper, folded once. Inside, barely enough to notice, was a dusting of fine white powder. You collected it carefully. Back at your office, the chemist confirmed what you suspected. Arsenic. Traces in the powder, in the teapot, and faintly, in the bottle the nurse had nearly used. The Rupert were not the first target. They had simply been next. That night, you sent telegrams to every precinct in London. 3 dead in Rupert Mansion, suspected arsenic poisoning. You asked the constable to check similar recent deaths with tea related. Symptoms. Most police stations would shove it off. Accidents, they'd say. Food poisoning. Bad milk. And most families wouldn't think twice about a new maid until it was too late. But you had a feeling this wasn't her first job, nor her first murder. And somewhere in London, she was already pouring the next cup. 3 days after the deaths at Rupert Mansion, she had already changed her name. This time, she was Clara Bell. It was a name she'd used before. It was soft, forgettable, and easy to say. Clara Bell smiled politely, kept her head low, and spoke only when spoken to. Her clothes were neat, her voice calm. She looked like someone who wouldn't hurt a fly. The house in Hampstead was much larger than the Rupert's family home. It had a tall black gate, shiny windows, and clean white steps. The Marsh family lived. Their Mr. and Mistress Marsh, their 3 children, an old aunt, and a cook named Nora, who smelled like onions and moved around with a loud sigh. Mr. Marsh was often unwell. He coughed at the table, rubbed his chest, and spent most days resting. His wife seemed kind but forgetful. Their last maid had left without warning. Mistress Marsh said she probably found a better job. The cook muttered something about bad luck in the house, but no one paid her much attention. Clara arrived with a letter of reference, fake, of course. It had the name of a church in Wandsworth and spoke of her excellent service and honest ways. The church didn't exist, but the stamp looked real. That was enough. By the end of the day, Clara had been given a room in the attic and a black uniform with a stiff collar. By the next morning, she knew where everything was. She had already seen the family's medicine box kept in a wooden cabinet above the pantry. There were bottles of syrup, a small jar of smelling salts, and on the bottom shelf, a tin labeled for ants. Inside was white powder. She didn't take it yet. She always waited. Patience kept her from being caught. Meanwhile, you were starting to see a pattern. Back in your small office in Whitechapel, you sat with your map of London, marking each case you could connect. You had received 2 replies to the telegrams you had sent. One came from a policeman in Chelsea. An elderly couple had died there in March. Their maid disappeared the same day. The cause of death? Bad fish, they said. But the maid's name, Lucy Hale, matched one from your notes. Another case was from Stoke Newington. A school teacher and her elderly mother, both found dead 2 weeks apart. Their maid had said she was homesick, then left quietly. No one checked on her after that. You drew red lines between the locations. Each victim had a maid who vanished just before or after they died. The names kept changing: Alice, Nora, Lucy, Mary. But something in the pattern felt familiar. The handwriting in their letters, the way they entered the home, the way they left. It wasn't about revenge. These weren't personal killings, but in each home something had gone missing. A ring here, a gold pin there. In one case, a silver brooch had disappeared from a woman's dress. The families were left with questions. The maid was never seen again. She's stealing, you said aloud, but she's doing it quietly and with purpose. You decided to visit the Rupert's home one more time. This time, you checked the kitchen more carefully. Behind a loose wooden board near the pantry floor, you found a spoon with white powder stuck to its edge. In the study, tucked inside a stack of old books, you found a journal belonging to the governess. One entry stood out: "The new maid Nora is too quiet." I asked her where she was from, and she paused before saying Surrey, but she didn't know the name of the town. There's something odd about her. She watches more than she works. You folded the page and placed it in your coat pocket. You were sure now. She was real, and she was still out there. At the Hampstead home, Clara was moving carefully. She offered to help the cook in the kitchen, though it wasn't part of her job. "Just in case Mistress Marsh ever needs me," she said softly. The cook allowed her to wash dishes and clean the table. Clara used the time to watch the family's habits. She learned who drank what, when, and how often. Mr. Marsh had black tea every evening at 6, always in the same cup with a small crack near the rim. His wife liked peppermint. The children drank warm milk with honey. That night, Clara placed a small amount of powder into Mr. Marsh's tea, just enough to upset his stomach. He spent the next day in bed, holding his stomach and groaning. Doctor came and called it something he ate. Clara offered to make the next pot of tea. Mistress Marsh agreed. You barely slept that night. Your thoughts were filled with the faces of the dead. You kept seeing the same blank expression on the maid's face, calm, quiet, cold. At dawn, someone knocked on your door. Telegram. Another death. Hampstead, Maine. Marsh. Maid disappeared early morning. You were out the door in seconds. The hunt had begun. It had been nearly 3 weeks since the death of Mistress Hawthorne, and the memory of the perfume bottle still lingered in your thoughts. You had catalogued every small item you saw in her bedroom: the scorch scent, the red ribbon, and then the faint powder near the rim. None of it had been reported as poison, and the coroner listed it as heart failure. Still, your instincts told you otherwise, and now there was a new case. Another family in Kensington had reported a sudden death. Time a middle-aged man named Mr. Alfred Harrow. His wife claimed he'd choked during dinner. The doctor said it was a stroke. But what caught your attention wasn't the cause of death. It was a passing remark from a constable on duty. The new maid didn't stick around, he'd said, shrugging. Hired last week. Gone the morning after he died. That was enough. 2 sudden deaths. 2 different homes. 2 missing maids. You visited the Harrow residence under the pretense of helping with funeral arrangements. While speaking to Mistress Harrow, you gently nudged the conversation toward the help. Terribly. Sorry for your loss, you said. Was your maid present when it happened? She sighed. Yes, unfortunately. She was young. Quiet. Strange eyes, now that I think of it. Watched everything we did, but barely spoke. You asked for a name, and she frowned. Agnes, I believe. Or Anna. Something like that. Didn't even ask for her wages. You thanked her and examined the dining room. The table was cleared, but a faint, sour scent still clung to the air. You moved closer to the cutlery drawer and found a small smudge of white powder. On the edge of a spoon. You collected it discreetly with a handkerchief. Outside, your assistant waited by the carriage. Another one? He asked. You nodded, and the maids vanished again. Later that evening, in your study, you reviewed the 2 cases. The names the maid gave were different. Her descriptions slightly altered. But there was a pattern: young, solitary, short-term employment, sudden death, disappearance. You marked them both on the map of London. 2 points, 2 weeks apart. You had the powder tested at a private lab the next morning. The results came by noon. Arsenic. It wasn't used in perfume. Not in that concentration. You leaned back in your chair, heart steady, mind alert. This wasn't coincidence. Someone was moving through the city, killing quietly, changing names, then leaving just before suspicion could catch up. A serial killer, but not one of the usual kind. No blood, no violence. Just silence and a slow death. And the killer wasn't a man hiding in alleyways. She was a girl serving tea in broad daylight. By evening, you'd pulled records from local hiring agencies. It was a long process, and most entries were handwritten. But the 3rd registry yielded something. Under the name Nora Eves, a girl had been placed at a home in Clockenwell just 4 days ago. You underlined the address and told your assistant to prepare the carriage. The street was quiet when you arrived. Gas lamps flickered. Against the fog, you approached the house and knocked. A tall, elderly man answered. His eyes looked heavy with lack of sleep. Good evening, you said. Is Miss Nora Eves employed here? The man blinked. She was, yes. Arrived a few days ago. Your heart quickened. And is she still with you? He shook his head. No, she left this morning. Said she had family matters. Is your household well? You asked gently. My wife is ill, he said, frowning. Started feeling sick yesterday. She's resting upstairs. You exchanged a look with your assistant. May I see her? You asked. The man hesitated, then led you up the stairs. His wife lay in bed, her skin pale and sweating. A bowl of soup sat half-eaten on the knitstand. You stepped closer, careful, not to startle her. Madam, you said softly, did the maid prepare this soup? She nodded faintly. You inspected the bowl and took a sample. Outside, you turned to your assistant. She's slipping up, growing careless. That's what happens when they feel invincible. He frowned. How do we catch her? You stared out at the fog creeping through the alleys. She's not changing her method. We know the poison. We know she's using different names. If we move quickly, we can trace where she strike next. And if we're wrong? You didn't answer. Because deep down, you weren't wrong. You were hunting a girl who had already killed 3. And she was just getting started. The next morning brought a bitter wind and a telegram. It was from your contact at the local hiring agency. You had asked him to keep an eye out for any recent placements matching your suspect's description. A young girl, under 25, requesting short-term work. The message on telegram was brief that said, found a girl named Sarah Trunk. Fit your description. Something off about her. She spoke very little and wore gloves. Wore gloves. You'd seen that before at the Hawthorne house. The maid wore gloves even while cleaning. Back then, it felt like a strange preference. Now it felt like strategy. Arsenic left behind a smell. Touch could transfer it. Gloves kept suspicion at bay. You didn't waste time. Within the hour, you and your assistant were in the carriage, heading toward the home of a Mr. and Mistress Redley and Holloway. They were a quiet couple, wealthy, childless, and according to the housekeeper who answered the door, currently away on holiday. But Sarah Trunk was still there. You introduced yourself as someone from the agency and asked to speak to her directly. The housekeeper hesitated. She went out an hour ago, sir. Said she was fetching fresh bread. Your assistant checked the street. No sign of her. Mind if we take a quick look around? You asked. She allowed it. The kitchen was spotless. Too spotless. A pot of tea sat untouched on the stove. You examined it, no smell of mint, no floral hints. Just a deep, bitter aroma. You found the tin of tea leaves nearby and opened it. Mixed among the dried leaves was something finer, powdery, white. You took a pinch, rubbed it between your fingers, then sealed it in a small paper pouch. She was preparing again. That meant there was still time. You turned to the housekeeper. When she returns, don't let her leave. Tell her the family sent a message and she needs to wait. Can you do that? The woman nodded, clearly rattled. Back in the carriage, your assistant turned to you. She come back eventually. Yes, you said, but we can't just wait for her. You returned to the agency office. The same clerk greeted you at the desk. Found her, did you? He asked. Possibly, you said. Did she sign anything? He opened a folder. Inside was a neatly written application form. The name at the top, Sarah Trunk. The handwriting was steady. Practiced. Too neat for a girl changing names every week. You scanned the rest. No permanent address. Just a place of birth. Whitechapel. Have you seen her before? You asked. He paused. Once, about 2 months ago. Different name. I remember the eyes. You took the file and stepped outside. The name was fake, but Whitechapel was real. It was a place people like her could disappear. 1,000 faces in the fog, no questions asked. You told the driver to head that way. As you entered the district, the streets changed, narrower, busier. Layers of smoke clung to the buildings, and the noise was constant carts rolling, voices shouting, boots on cobblestone. You walked through alleys and courtyards, asking questions. Some shrugged, some laughed. But eventually, an old woman sitting near a bakery caught your attention. She's back, is she? She asked when you described the girl. Your eyes narrowed. You've seen her before? Lived down this way last winter. Took care of an old man, Mr. Hollis. Washed his clothes, cleaned his floors. Then he died. Poisoned, you asked? Didn't say. But he was fine 1 week. Buried the next. Girl vanished right after. You thanked her and moved on. A pattern, now stretching back months, possibly longer. But still no real name, until your assistant tugged your sleeve. Sir, he said, at the back of this chapel, they keep a record of deaths. Mr. Hollis's name might be in there. You? Followed him through the chapel's old stone archway. The caretaker was hesitant, but allowed access. Inside the register, next to Mr. Hollis's name, a note was written, Caretaker Esther Grady. Esther, not Sarah, not Anna, not Nora, Esther. You said the name aloud. It felt right, sharp, cold. The caretaker leaned in. She stayed in the servant rooms upstairs. Still empty. No one's taken it since. You climbed the steps. The room was small, damp, and bare, except for a loose floorboard near the cot. You knelt and pried it open. Inside was a small metal tin. Wrapped in cloth, you opened it. 3 items. A vial of arsenic. A folded stack of names and addresses, some crossed out. And a photograph. A younger Esther, maybe 15, standing beside an older woman. The woman's eyes were kind. The girl's were not. You held the picture a little longer than you needed. 2. This was your killer, not a ghost, not a rumor. A real person, real enough to leave behind poison and memories. You stood and turned to your assistant. She has a list, you said, and she's working through it. The list lay heavy in your coat pocket, folded once, edges damp from the chapel's cold stone floor. You hadn't opened it again since finding it hidden inside the hymn book drawer. There was something grim about its structure. 4 names still unmarked. 6 already crossed through. No embellishments. No code. Just names. Plain, quiet death on a scrap of paper. You waited until you were back in the cab before unfolding it again. The names stared back at you, black ink slightly smudged. Redley family. Brampton family. Fletcher family. Denham family. The Brampton family would be next if she followed the same pattern. You remembered your assistant's theory about her choosing. Homes with widowers, elderly couples, or those without children. Quiet homes, isolated, predictable. Your hand gripped the edge of the seat as the carriage rattled along cobbled streets toward Stoke Newington. If she'd already begun working there, they were in danger. You'd barely stopped the Redleys in time. The ride was long and slow. Rain ticked against the windows, the driver mumbling curses at the mud-thickened roads. By the time you reached the Brampton residence, early afternoon light had already begun to dim. It was a modest home, a small gate, narrow pathway, ivy creeping across whitewashed brick. You approached the door and knocked firmly, pressing your boots into the stone step to hide your urgency. A woman opened it, late 30s, polite, but tired-looking. Her apron was lightly dusted with flour. Yes? She asked, cautious but not unfriendly. You gave her your alias special inspector, following a trail of forged references. I believe your new maid may be using a false identity, you said. Her face changed at once. Anna, she said. She just arrived yesterday. Came with a letter from a hiring office. Very quiet girl. Neat and clean, hardly says a word. You asked to come inside, and she stepped aside slowly, concern starting to rise behind her eyes. The kitchen was tidy spices hung in rows, a kettle gently, steaming on the stove. On the counter sat a half-set tea tray. 2 cups, one filled, one untouched. You walked over, lifted the poured teacup, and gave it the faintest sniff. It wasn't overwhelming, but there was something in it, bitter, familiar. Has anyone drunk this? You asked. No, I don't think so. She just poured it. You turned. Where is she now? Upstairs, I think, making the beds. Your assistant was already heading for the staircase. You followed quickly behind. The hallway above was dim and narrow, lit only by the soft gray glow of a window at the end. A floorboard creaked ahead. A shadow moved. Then she stepped into view. She was carrying a bundle of folded linen under one arm. The same composed face, the same dark uniform. Calm, controlled. She didn't speak, didn't panic. Just stared at you for one quiet second. Then she ran. Not a flailing run, but swift. Calculated. She dropped the linen and dashed past you both down the stairs. You turned at once and followed, boots thudding against wood, your assistant just behind. By the time you reached the front door, she had already disappeared into this rain. You sprinted down the street, heart pounding, breath visible in the damp air. You followed her tracks as best as you could, dark skirts vanishing around corners. A flash of a bonnet, but she moved like someone who knew exactly where she was going. Familiar alleys. Hidden gaps between houses. You lost her near a delivery. Yard, where crates blocked the back lanes and smoke from bakeries made the air thick. For several minutes, you stood there, fists clenched, searching every movement in the fog. She was gone. That night, you sat in silence at your desk, staring at the remaining names. Fletcher, Chelsea, Denham, Croydon. You couldn't afford. Another mistake. She had seen your face. She knew someone was tracking her. She wouldn't run forever. She would try again. That much you were certain of. You reviewed every detail from past victims. How she slipped into households quietly. How she disappeared without raising suspicion once the job was done. She never stayed more than 3 days, never left a trace of her real identity. Every name she used was slightly altered enough to pass unnoticed, but her face stayed the same. You returned to the hiring office early next morning. This time, you didn't bother with niceties. You pushed past the sleepy clerk and scanned the record. Book yourself. There it was. New placement. Clara Hunt, sent to mistress. Denham, Croydon, hired this morning. So she had skipped Fletcher. Whether by design or denial, you didn't know. But Denham was now her next and possibly final target. You closed the book slowly and exhaled. Croydon wasn't far, but time was short. By the time you reached the Denham residence, the fog had thickened again. The cottage stood alone near the end of a sloping lane. No nearby neighbors, no traffic, no movement, but the shifting trees. You knocked. A minute later, an elderly woman opened the door. Her face was warm and kindly, but her shoulders bent slightly. With age, yes, she asked. I'm sorry to intrude, ma'am, you said. I'm with the City Watch. It's about your new maid. Oh? Is something wrong? She may be dangerous? I'd like to speak with her. The woman blinked, clearly startled. She's just started this morning? Such a pleasant girl. She's preparing tea right now. Your heart quickened. I need to see her immediately. You stepped into the kitchen. There she was, standing by the stove, stirring something in a small pot, back turned. Esther, you said quietly. She paused, but didn't turn around. You've moved fast, she said. Her voice was low, calm. I wasn't expecting you so soon. You took a step closer, slowly. No weapon drawn, just watching her. I know who you are. I know about the list. She reached for a cloth and wiped her. Hands gently. Then you've read more than most. Another step. Why did you choose these families? No answer. Just the soft bubbling of the pot behind her. Then, finally, she turned. Because they never asked questions, she said. Because no one ever noticed me until it was too late. She stood calmly in the kitchen. The air was thick with steam and the faint smell of lavender soap and boiled herbs. Her dark dress was spotless, her hands still clutching the kitchen cloth like she had nothing to hide. I know who you are, you repeated. Esther tilted her head slightly. Do you? She said, her voice almost amused. You stepped closer. Your assistant was near the door, ready if she made a move. I've spoken to the Redleys, you said, to the Bramptons. I've read your list. Her eyes narrowed just enough to register. Surprise. Then you've read the names of the forgotten, she said. Your voice hardened. You poisoned them. Esther gave a quiet, breathy laugh. I gave them peace. That sentence hung in the air like smoke. The Denham woman stood behind you now, quiet, confused, not yet understanding the danger in her home. You raised a hand slightly. Esther, I'm taking you in. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. But she was already moving. Not with panic, but with precision. In one motion, she flung the cloth into the boiling pot, sending steam billowing toward your face. You recoiled instinctively. She grabbed the edge of a wooden stool and shoved it toward the door, blocking your assistance. Path just long enough to dash through the scullery door and into the back garden. You gave chase instantly. She was fast. Darting across the muddy yard and into the trees behind the cottage, skirts hitched just enough to free her boots. You followed, heart thudding, the wind slicing at your face. Branches whipped past as you crashed into the underbrush, shouting her name. But she didn't look back. She moved like someone who knew every root and ditch in the woods. Then, silence. You stopped. Only the wind, and the slow drip of rain through leaves. You spun in circles, searching the shadows. She had vanished again. It took over an hour to retrace your steps to the Denham house. She hadn't returned. The elderly woman stood in her parlor, clutching a shawl, pale and confused. She didn't even take her bag, she said. You opened it carefully. Inside were only a spare apron, a small tin of dried lavender, and another list. A new one. 2 names. Fletcher family. Albert family. The following morning, London's fog felt heavier. Not just. With weather, but with dread. 2 names left, and no idea which she'd go to next. You split your team. Your assistant took Chelsea. You rode north toward Hampstead. Mistress Lowe was a schoolteacher. Lived alone in a terraced flat near the park. When you arrived, she was already unwell. She greeted you at the door in a robe, her hand trembling against the frame. "I'm sorry," she said weakly. "It's a bit early for visitors." You saw the signs immediately: disorientation, dry lips, fatigue. You pushed your way inside gently. On the stove was a still warm teapot. You poured a cup, sniffed it. Almond, faint but unmistakable. You turned to her. "Did your new maid prepare this?" She nodded slowly. "She left just now. Said she was going to fetch milk." You rushed into the street, scanning left and right. No one. She had slipped through your hands again. By evening, the City Watch had placed notices at every hiring office, sketches drawn from witness descriptions. Descriptions circulated through private agencies, servants' networks, even charity homes. But she kept vanishing. A ghost in a uniform. You returned to the office that night, your coat soaked, your boots tracking mud. You tossed the latest copy of the list onto your desk and stared at the flickering lamp. What drove her? It wasn't wealth. She left money behind. It wasn't revenge, not personal, at least. None of the victims had direct ties. So what was it? Your assistant entered quietly. "We found something," he said. "A witness. One of the housemaids from Holloway. She remembers Esther reading a newspaper the day before she left." You looked up. Which paper? Local. From Whitechapel. A case about a girl who died in service. Burnt alive in a laundry room. No charges filed. Employer blamed faulty stove. But the article mentioned the girl's name, Esther. You froze. Her name wasn't fake? Your assistant shook his head. It may be her real name, or someone she knew. You leaned back slowly. A girl forgotten, swallowed by the system. And now someone was making the world remember by force, through fear. That night, you barely slept. You kept replaying her words in the denim kitchen, because no one ever noticed me until it was too late. Now, with every new household she entered, she carved her name deeper into the city's memory. And she wasn't finished yet. 2 days passed. Then came the third. Fog rolled across the cobbled streets like a living thing, curling into doorways and pressing against window panes. You stood at the intersection of Dean Street and Clarendon, watching the early workers march grimly toward their morning toil. The paperboy's cry echoed down the lane, but no one listened. Then your assistant arrived, coat unbuttoned, breathless. "She's taken another name." You turned quickly. "Where?" He handed you the slip of paper. It was a letter, torn at the corner, scrawled in hasty script. "We've hired a new girl through Miss Collings' housekeeper registry. Name of Eliza Fern. Arrived Tuesday. Pleasant thing, quiet, obedient. Works in the Fletcher's home in Chelsea." You didn't need to finish reading. Eliza Fern. It was Esther again. Another mask. Another home. And one of the names on her list, Fletcher. The Fletcher residence was a narrow 3-story townhouse tucked along a quiet stretch of Royal Hospital Road. The iron gate creaked slightly as you passed through it, boots clinking against the stone steps. You knocked firmly. A man opened the door. Late 50s, gold spectacles, suspicious eyes. "I'm looking into a series of poisonings," you said. "May I speak with your maid?" His eyes narrowed. "She left this morning. Said her mother had taken ill. Took her things and vanished before breakfast. Did she leave any forwarding? Address?" He shook his head. "Left no trace." But he glanced toward the parlor, then back. "We've all had headaches. My wife's been feeling faint." You pushed past him, heart sinking. In the kitchen, a kettle still steamed. On the counter was a small corked bottle, half empty. You uncorked it and sniffed. Bitter almonds. Again. Esther had been here. And again, she'd slipped away just hours ahead. But something else caught your eye. On the back of the pantry door was a scrap of fabric, caught on a nail. Pale blue linen. The corner of an apron. stamped faintly in the corner, property of Miss Collings' registry. She wasn't hiding anymore. She was taunting you. You rode hard across town, wheels splashing through puddles, coat soaked from the waist down. Miss Collings' registry was a prim little office, wedged between a bookshop and a seamstress, its window filled with dainty handwriting advertising experienced household staff, vetted and respectable. You stepped inside. A woman with sharp spectacles looked up from her desk. "May I help you?" You placed the linen scrap on the counter. "I need to know which homes you've recently sent a girl named Eliza Fern to." She stiffened. "I'm afraid client placements are confidential." You leaned in. "She's killed at least 4 people. And if we don't find her, she'll more." The woman paled. After a pause, she opened a small leather-bound law book, ran a finger down the column. "Eliza Fern," she murmured. "Placed last Tuesday with the Fletchers in Chelsea. Before that, the Lows in Hampstead." She looked up, eyes wide. "But she was hired once more, under a different name." You waited. "Harriet Tewson. Hired yesterday by a Mr. Alden. He lives on the outskirts of Brixton. Alone." You nodded once. "Thank you." The Alden house stood half hidden by trees, a detached manor that had once been grand, but now looked forgotten. Ivy crept across its stone walls. The garden was overgrown. Crows perched on the wrought iron gate. You knocked twice. No answer. You knocked again, louder. Still nothing. You stepped around the side, peering through the windows. Inside, dust floated, in the sunlight like slow snowflakes. But something caught your eye. A teacup on the sill, still steaming. You broke the latch and pushed inside. The air smelled faintly of chamomile and something else. A sour chemical scent. "In the sitting room, mister." Alden sat upright in a chair, one hand resting limply on his lap, the other gripping his chest. His eyes were open, mouth slightly parted. "Dead." You moved quickly through the house, heart racing. No sign of Esther. Then you reached the servants' quarters. In one corner, a packed satchel, still open. Inside, another list. More names, not just 2 or 3 anymore. A dozen, each with notes scribbled beside them. Weak lungs. Nervous tremors. Lonely, no next of kin. You stood in silence, staring at the list. This wasn't chaos. This was selection. A pattern. A system. She was choosing her victims carefully. Not just for vengeance, but for symbolism. Those who could vanish quietly. Those whom no one would notice until they were gone. You turned the paper over. At the bottom, scrawled in sharp ink. "You see now, don't you? This is not about me. It's about them." That night, you barely spoke. Your assistant tried to piece together the connections, laying out the list on your desk. But you couldn't focus. The city was still turning. New houses, new hirings, new names. And she was still out there, moving beneath the surface, like a whisper in the walls. One step ahead, always, until now. Because there was something in the note she hadn't intended to give away. Something you were sure she missed. A location. You traced your finger across the names and stopped. 2 of them were from the same district. Not just district, the same street. One of them still alive. One of them still had time. Rain hammered the rooftops of Southwark as your carriage jolted through the dark streets. The list clutched in your gloved hand had bled faintly in the damp, but the name was still legible. Mistress, Lillian Wakefield widowed. Lives alone. Servants dismissed last month due to illness. Perfect, you thought grimly. Just Esther's type. You gave the driver the address again. Faster. The horse wheezed against the storm, hooves clattering over slick cobbles. You arrived just past. 8. The Wakefield house stood narrow and pale behind a crooked gate. A single lamp glowed faintly inside. You jumped down, boots splashing into a puddle, and ran to the door. Knocked. Waited. Nothing. Knocked again, louder this time. Still no sound. You stepped back and tried the window. Locked. Damn it. Then movement. A flicker behind the curtain upstairs. You drew your revolver. Another flicker. This time, a shadow crossing. The landing. You moved swiftly, pried open the servant's side entrance with a metal file from your coat. The door creaked. You stepped inside. The house was cold. You could smell it. Not just the damp wood or musty books, but something floral. Syrupy, cloying, almond. Your heart sank. In the front room, the fire had gone out. The teapot on the table was untouched. Then you saw her. Mistress Wakefield. She was still breathing, slumped in her armchair, her eyelids fluttering. A teacup trembled in her hand. You rushed to her side. Mistress Wakefield, you whispered. Don't drink it, she blinked, confused. My girl said it would help me sleep. You knocked the cup from her hand and caught her as she sagged forward. She was dazed, sluggish but alive. A creak upstairs. Footsteps. You turned toward the stairwell, and there she stood. Esther. At the top of the stairs, dressed no longer as a maid, but in a fitted black coat, her hair pulled back sharply. Calm, collected, dead in the eyes. Detective, she said softly. You raised your revolver. Don't, she added, and with an eerie, measured calm, she turned and ran. You followed. She moved fast down the back hall, through the kitchen, out. The garden door. Rain lashed your face as you gave chase, boots slipping on wet stones. She darted across a neighbor's yard, climbed the fence, and vanished into the alley beyond. You followed her shadow into the dark. Every corner a potential. Trap, and a flash of movement left. You turned, too late. She struck. Something sharp cut across your shoulder. You stumbled, gun dropping to the ground with a wet clack. She was on you, eyes blazing. You think you understand me, she hissed. You don't. You elbowed her, hard, and broke free. Grabbed your weapon. She was already running again into the maze of alleyways behind the railway depot. You gave chase, blood warm down your side, boots pounding through the filth. Past crates, empty barrels, rats scurrying into gutters. Then silence. Gone. You paused, chest heaving, scanning. Then a whisper behind you. You'll never catch me in the dark. You spun. Nothing. Your pulse thundered in your ears. Rain, dripping, footsteps? No, just your own breath echoing off the brick. She was gone. Again, you returned to the Wakefield house soaked and seething. The inspector had arrived with his men, now tending to Mistress Wakefield. She live, he said. You got here just in time. You said nothing. There was no victory in this. Only failure delayed. The killer was still loose, still choosing names from that cursed list. And this time she had seen your face. You sat alone that night, shirt bloodstained and shoulder bandaged, staring at the list again. 11 names crossed out, 2 remaining. You lit a match, then paused. She wasn't just killing for sport. No, this wasn't chaos. It was a message. And somewhere in this list, somewhere among these forgotten souls, was the truth. The reason she started, the person who tipped the first domino. And unless you stopped her before the next full moon, someone else would pay for a crime they didn't even know they'd committed. You turned the last page of the satchel's notebook. There, in clean script, not a victim's name, but a location. Braybrook Asylum, dated 5 years ago, initials beneath it. E. G. Esther Graham. She'd been there, or someone had sent her there. Now it was time to find out why. The gates of Braybrook Asylum groaned as they opened, the rusted hinges shrieking like wounded animals. You stepped through, coat collar high against the bitter wind, your shoulder still aching beneath the bandage. The asylum had been closed for over a year, its windows boarded, its walls stained with rain and rot, but its secrets still lingered like smoke that refused to clear. You weren't here by official order. The files had been sealed after a fire gutted the East Wing records lost, or so. They claimed, but fire never erases everything. Someone always remembers. Inside, the air was thick with mildew and damp ash. You moved carefully through the charred hallways, boots crunching over broken tiles. A faded sign on the wall read, Female Ward, East Wing. The door was half-hinged, blackened from heat. You pushed it open. Beyond it, Silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the sort that follows screams. You found what you needed in the remnants of the records room. A drawer warped by fire still held a half-burnt folder, its edges curled, but the center intact. Patient number 1147. Name: Esther Graham, admitted. 1879 age, 17 diagnosis. Hysteria brought on by trauma and delusions of persecution. Reason for commitment: attempted poisoning of employer. Legal guardian: father name redacted, your brow furrowed. It wasn't the poisoning. That caught your eye, but the phrase, delusions of persecution. You turned the page. A doctor's note, dated 3 weeks after her admission. Patient insists her former employer attempted to assault her. Claims her dismissal was followed by violence at home. Bruises noted. Guards instructed to monitor behavior closely. Subject displays extreme distrust of authority. You exhaled slowly. Not delusions. Then memories. True ones dismissed by men in white coats who'd rather label a girl mad than confront what she'd endured. The next note was worse. Patient grew agitated after visit from father. Screaming. Referred to solitary. Suggested sedation. And the one after. Patient escaped during the Braybrook fire. Presumed dead. Except she wasn't. She'd escaped. And now she was burning her way back through everyone who'd buried her story. Outside the asylum, the wind had picked up, flinging dust and dead leaves into the sky. You stood at the gate, staring down the hill toward the city. She was no longer killing at random. Each name on that list had been someone tied to her downfall. A former employer, a neighbor, a doctor, a witness who said nothing. And now only one remained. You pulled the list from your coat and stared at the final name, Dr. Lionel Barrett, the man who'd signed off on her commitment, a psychiatrist, still practicing, still living comfortably in Mayfair, his hands clean while hers were stained with blood and arsenic. You wasted no time. By nightfall, you were outside Barrett's townhouse, watching candlelight flicker behind his study window. A butler answered your knock, eyes weary. Yes, the man asked. Adjusting his cuffs, you held up your badge. Detective Inspector, I need to speak to Dr. Barrett, urgently. He hesitated, then stepped aside. Dr. Barrett was older than you'd imagined. Hair gray at the temples, face lined not with guilt, but with pride. He stood as though he expected respect, perhaps even feared it. What's this about? He asked. Folding his hands behind his back, you gave him the list. Do you recognize any of these names? He squinted, lips tightening. Of course. These were former patients, employees. What of it? They're dead, you said, voice flat. All poisoned, one by one. We believe the woman responsible is someone you once committed to Braybrook, Esther Graham. At her name, a flicker of something passed across his face. Not shock, not horror, annoyance. She was unstable, he muttered. Deeply disturbed, you stepped closer. Was she? Or was she a girl you and others buried because her truth was inconvenient? Barrett bristled. You don't understand. A crash cut him off. From the kitchen, the butler shouted. Then silence. Your hand went to your revolver. Barrett backed toward the study desk, reaching for something. Don't, you warned, but he ignored you. You fired, not to kill, just the vase near his hand. It shattered. Sit down, you ordered. She's here. You moved toward the back of the house, slow and steady, the floor creaking under each step. Then you saw through the parlor window, a dark figure slipping into the cellar doors. She hadn't come to threaten. She'd come to finish it. You followed. Down the stairs, into the dark. The cellar stank of oil and damp stone, shelves lined with brandy. An old furnace groaned in the corner. You moved past the crates. Gun raised, then click. A bottle shifted. You turned, and there she was. Esther, face shadowed, eyes calm. Leave, she said softly. You didn't lower your weapon. It ends tonight. It ended years ago, she replied, stepping forward. You just weren't listening. Don't make me shoot. She tilted her head. "You won't," she lunged. "You fired once." A shot grazed her arm. She hissed and dropped the knife she'd been holding. But she didn't stop. She tackled. You into the shelves. Bottles smashed. Brandy spilled. Your gun clattered across the stone. You wrestled. Kicking, shoving, gritting your teeth as you tried to reach the blade again. Finally, you landed a punch to her ribs. She gasped, staggered. You grabbed the revolver. She froze. Ben slowly raised her hands. "I just wanted them to know what they did." She whispered. You didn't reply. You cuffed her, wrists shaking. Behind you, Barrett had crept down, watching with pale, trembling hands. "I should have listened," he murmured. But it was too late for that. Much too late. The trial was swift. The papers called it a poisoner's reckoning, splashing Esther's face across every front page as if she were some grotesque novelty, something to be dissected, judged, then forgotten. You sat through every hearing, watching her behind the glass. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She simply listened, hands folded neatly in her lap, as the court recited the names of the dead like a grocery list. There were no tears from her, not when the prosecutor described the arsenic, not when Barrett recounted her delusions, and not when the jury delivered its verdict. Guilty. The judge called her a danger to society, a woman corrupted by madness. And hate. You didn't speak. But you knew they hadn't listened. Not really. She requested one meeting before her transfer to Newgate. You weren't sure why you went. Maybe you wanted answers. Maybe you wanted peace. What you got was neither. The prison guard led you down a narrow hall, past stone walls that seemed to hum, with the weight of forgotten confessions. Esther sat alone at the table, wrists chained, her expression calm. She looked up as you entered. Detective. You didn't sit. You asked for this, you said. She nodded once. I did. A moment passed between you. No guards, no crowd. Just two people who had spent the last month circling each other's pain. Why? You asked finally. Esther tilted her head. Because. No one else would. She tapped the table with one finger. They think I wanted revenge, that I poisoned out of rage or madness. But it wasn't madness. It was memory. You said nothing. I told the truth back then, she continued. He tried to force himself on me. The others, they helped cover it up. Lied to protect their own. I screamed. I bled. And then they locked me away. Called it hysteria. You watched her carefully. That doesn't make what you did right. Her eyes met yours. I know. And for the first time, you saw something flicker behind her gaze. Not guilt, not remorse, but weariness. She leaned forward, the chains pulling taut. You think I didn't try to live? That I didn't try to forget? I scrubbed floors, stitched coats, begged for food. I tried. And every time I saw one of them, smiling like nothing ever happened. She shook her head slowly. I didn't kill them because I wanted to. I killed them because they never thought I could. Silence filled the room, thick and unforgiving. You exhaled. What do you want me to do with that? She gave a small, bitter smile. Whatever you like. You'll leave here. You'll close your file. Maybe they'll promote you. Maybe they won't, but I'll hang. And that'll be that. Her voice lowered. But you'll remember me, not because I was a monster, but because I was right. The morning of her execution, it rained, cold, steady, relentless. You stood on the other side of the prison wall, coat soaked, boots heavy with mud. You didn't go inside. You didn't need to see the rope. You'd already seen enough. The bell tolled at 8. A gull cried overhead. And then it was done. Esther Graham, age 27, was gone. The city moved on. Months passed. Other cases came. Other crimes. The streets of London never slept, and neither did the violence beneath them. But some nights, when the wind scraped the windows just right, you thought of her. Of the girl who'd been buried beneath silence, who'd clawed her way back up through fire and poison just to be heard. You thought of the doctor who'd lied, the father who'd vanished, the system that chewed her up and called it justice. You told yourself the case was closed. But in the quiet moments, when the whiskey sat untouched on your desk and the candle burned low, you knew better. Some truths don't fit in case files. Some crimes aren't solved. They're survived. You opened your notebook, flicked past the pages of old cases, and stared at her name, scrawled in your own hand, underlined in ink that had smudged in the rain. Esther Graham. You'd stopped believing in monsters a long time ago. Now you just believed in people. And sometimes they were worse.